The May 25th graphic video of a white police officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he ceased to breathe has triggered global protests and outrage about racial discrimination and inequality. The Black Lives Matter movement has reignited a debate about systemic racism and its widespread tentacles that have stymied Black people from thriving on the social, economic, and political level. This evening, on our second edition of Race Relations in Barbados, we want to continue our conversation about racism on our very own 166 square miles. This evening, we explore racism, or as some suggest, classism in Barbados. Are there lingering structures that continue to divide our society, giving one race the advantage over the other in the pursuit of the Barbadian dream? How do we build an equitable society that every Barbadian can have the opportunity to reach their full potential? Good evening, my name is Kareem Smith, and this evening we will explore these issues and more with our distinguished panel. On our panel, we have Mr. Edward Clarke, the president of the Barbados Private Sector Association, which quite recently made a historic statement supporting the removal of British Navy Captain Horatio Nelson's statue from our Hero Square, along with an expression of the need for us to move towards a more progressive Barbados, where there is more inclusiveness, diversity, and equality of access for all. Welcome, Mr. Clarke.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Tennyson Joseph, a senior lecturer in political science at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus since 2007, and who has studied very closely the politics of decolonization. Welcome, Dr. Joseph. We also have Mr. Adonijah Alleyne, an outspoken member of the Gainam Council for the Advancement of Rastafari, or ICAR, who has been extremely outspoken about the fight for marijuana use as a sacrament and for the inclusion of the Rastafarian community in the development of a thriving medicinal marijuana industry. We also have Annalee Davis, a visual artist who has been a vocal participant in support of the Black Lives Matter movements here in Barbados, and who has recently launched a forum entitled Let We Talk, Real Conversations on Race and Class in Barbados. Welcome, Annalee Davis. Also on our panel is a young man of East Indian descent and a member of the Islamic faith. He is also the vice president of the University of the West Indies Guild of Students right here at Cave Hill campus in Barbados. Mr. Tahir Bobulia, welcome. And of course, we want to hear from you, our viewers, throughout the 90 minutes. Post your questions and comments live on the feed. At this time, we're gonna get right into it. And I wanna start with Annalee Davis. When we were speaking earlier, you would have described yourself as a white Barbadian growing up on a plantation. What was your experience and how has it shaped your perception of the society in the area of race and class?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Kareem. It's good to be part of these ongoing conversations. Well, I was raised on a plantation in St. John, and I would say that my understanding of race and class were formed by that experience. I went to a small private primary school that was exclusively white. I would have then, when I wrote the 11+ examination, I went on to foundation school, and that was the first time at the age of 11 that I experienced being a minority in an educational space. And shortly after that, I was transferred to the convent, which had a different kind of makeup than foundation school, with approximately, I think maybe 60% white students, 40% Black, and a few expatriate students. And even though I would say that I was conscious as a young child living on a plantation that there was a difference between the people that lived in my house in terms of race and the social circles that we inhabited and people that worked on the plantation. Now, I didn't have a language to understand what those differences were. But it was something that I was interested in learning more about. And I observed that when we were at secondary school, that even though it was a more integrated space, that something happened when the school bell rang, and we mostly retreated to our kind of segregated lives. And that both white and Black Bajans, I think, were complicit in leading those segregated lives. I then left and I went away to school in Canada and the US. I wondered whether I would feel like I belonged more in a place that was dominated by a white population, but I didn't. And so that was an interesting thing to kind of experience for the first time as a teenager. But I think that what's been important with that experience of growing up on a plantation is as an artist and a cultural activist, my interest is understanding the plantation as this kind of economic model that shaped Barbados and the Caribbean. And that is something that I explore in my work as an artist. It's something I'm conscious of where I live currently on a working dairy farm that was originally operational as a 17th century sugar plantation. I'm interested in how we can transform these spaces through art and culture, how we can be cognizant of that very traumatic history. And so it's something I've been interested in sort of grappling with for many years, thinking about issues of race and class and the potential as people with agency to live more inclusive and, I think, equitable lives through the kinds of work that we do. So I think that initial formation on the plantation has been well, it's been key in my interest and my research as a practicing visual artist and as an activist.
Now we're going to move on to Adonijah. You've heard Annalee's assessment of the Barbadian society that she has grown up in. How does your experience compare? How does it differ? And how does her story, in your opinion, differ from that of the average Black Barbadian young woman or young man?
Yeah, well, it certainly is kind of different from my story for sure. You know, growing up in the country, we never had to, in St. Philip, we never had too much interaction with white people. You know, we were country people. But when I got to Harrison College in 1961, I got a fairly rude awakening as to what the realities were. On my first day at school, one of my white fellow students called me a tar baby, you know, which was a little bit of a shock, you know. But then again, he made up for it by beating him for the whole lunch hour. So that didn't have that much of an effect on me. But I have always been very aware of the fact that, as I said some years ago, there are really two Barbadoses. You know, they really are. I've had reason to have interactions with some members of white Barbados. And their story is, of course, a lot different than mine, you know. But not being a racist, I think, like Black Stalin always says, everybody have their own space, you know. And my concern, though, is to make sure that within this own space, there's equality, you know, and there's equal opportunity. I am still not convinced that there is a level playing field in Barbados as far as a lot of things are concerned, especially as far as business is concerned. I remember there was a well-known businessman here who used to always boast about how he pulled himself up by his bootstraps because he started out with just a tractor, and then he built that in. He purveyed that into a multi-million-dollar business. The fact, of course, that remains that he would have had the possibility of getting a loan to get a tractor back in them days, which was something that was not within the reach of your average Black farmer, you know. So a lot of things are still there. There's still a lot of colonial hang-ups in all kinds of ways. You mentioned the question of cannabis, Kobe as well. Not Kobe, sorry, Kareem. And that is one of the areas in which the colonial system and the racist system is still very much entrenched. I should probably stop there for now.
very much. Lots of food for thought from you, Adonijah. I want to move on to Edward Clarke. As a representative of the business community, you've heard Adonijah state quite clearly that he does not believe there's a level playing field in Barbados in terms of the business climate and in many other areas. But your emphasis, your focus is on business. What do you see in the Barbadian society? Is Adonijah correct as far as you're concerned? Is the playing field level?
I think, Kareem, the playing field is a lot more level now than it was 25, 30 years ago, or even more. There's no doubt that back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even up to the 90s, there's a different dispensation running these institutions across Barbados, and the boards and the management teams on these institutions. So there may have been more leaning towards people of their same color and favoritism and so on. But I would say nowadays, certainly in Barbados today, if you look at the landscape, there's a whole different look to what's happening in Barbados. And I believe that when I speak to the lending institutions, I've asked this question because I've heard it numerous times. And Kareem, you and I have had this discussion as well. You know, I've heard it. I know there's a perception that there is a favoritism towards people of white color versus people of black color. But when I talk to the banks and the lending institutions, I'm not hearing that from them. And these are all, most of them are black management teams, black lending officers. I'm not hearing that from them. So I just wonder if there's more of a misperception than a reality. But my thing to you, Kareem, I've said all along, if the perception becomes very strong and too strong, it becomes a sense of reality. So my belief is that we need to look into it. And if we can find that it is the case, it needs to be fixed. And I must agree with Adonijah, you have to have equality. And, you know, Adonijah mentioned that he saw two Barbadoses. I grew up in a different environment than Annalee. I live in St. John, but I grew up in the middle of a village in Four Roads in St. John. My father owned a shop, but, you know, I grew up in a different environment. When you tell Adonijah, there are much more than two divisions in Barbados. Even the white race in Barbados have 2 or 3 different divisions among them or more. And I'm sure among the black race, there's that as well. So it is not just a black and white. There's a lot more class prejudice as well that goes on in Barbados. But when it comes to lending and ability to finance, access to finance and so on, I do not see it. I have not seen it. I have been a member of the Sagicor senior management team for the last 10 years, participating in many loan officer meetings and discussions about investments and financing for people. And I've never once experienced it yet. And when you look at a loans application, the last thing you worry about is the color of the applicant in our reality. The first thing is, can this person repay this loan? Does the person have security to repay the loan? I think what has happened in Barbados is that a lot of small businessmen, black and white, but because of the numbers of people, obviously a lot more black small businessmen, come on prepared when it comes to applying for finance, and they're turned down. Many of them are turned down. Obviously, more blacks would be turned down than white. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that's where I'm hoping that the Small Business Association, I know they've done a lot of work already, but I want to see a lot wider transfer of knowledge and skill set to have people better prepared to access the finance. I really have not seen it, Adonijah. I have not seen it, Kareem, at this time. I have not experienced it in my last 10 years in operating in that kind of position. So I can't support it, but the perception is there. And once there's so much perception, it becomes a sense of reality, and it needs to be fixed. And I am ready. And I've told people, I think that's where the discussion must come in. We must discuss it, understand the underlying sources of this perception. And if it is reality, well, it needs to be gotten rid of immediately, in my opinion. There's no place in Barbados for that.
Okay. Thank you. Once again, quite a bit of food for thought, a slightly different perspective from that of Adonijah. But now we're going to move to Tahir, who is perhaps by far the youngest person on the panel. You are of East Indian descent, and you've grown up in the same Barbados, on one hand, in Islamic traditions that many people might perceive to be, rooted in business. but you also interact quite seamlessly, perhaps, with all segments of society as an active member of the Cave Hill population. From where you sit, do you still see issues of race and class to be interrogated among our younger generations, or are those issues behind us? What's the experience of the young Barbadian?
Hi, good evening, Kareem, and good evening all. First of all, let me thank everyone for having me, Barbados Today, for having me on the show. Yes, from my point of view, there has been a change, as Adonijah would have said, that there has been a change in the perception now, and I believe the youth are progressing, and developing the ideas which would have been discussed before, and more coming together, taking all hands on deck to fight this issue of racism and classism. Yes, Edward talked about the perception of classism and certain things of whites being better and what's not, but to be honest, from a youth perspective, there are still issues, but the youth are now coming together to fight the issue together. Whites, blacks, Muslims, Indians, regardless of where you go, they're now seeing the common good of moving forward together and battling it on a whole together, all hands on deck. So I think we need to all take this approach of being together. And if it's an issue for me, it's an issue for you. If it's an issue for you, it's an issue for me. So we saw this as an example in this Corona time as well, that Corona didn't just affect you, it affected us all. So if an issue comes up and an issue is affecting you, it must have some bearing on me, because it happens. It's a reality in our community and in our Barbados. So I think we need to come together, all hands on deck, and fight this issue together. And I think Edward touched on a very important point of changing the mindset when it goes with regards to coming to the banks and stuff like that. I think it goes back to the educational system as well, where we need to teach our youth coming up the realities of life, the realities of situations, and how to be better equipped to deal with the real world out there. Because dealing with history and stuff like that, and preparing a business plan, like Edward was saying, when you're carrying it to the bank, there's a perception that the blacks may not be as well prepared. But what does this go back to? The education system. So we need a better equipped educational system where we can train our youth to be more knowledgeable in facing the real world issues and what we are going through in the real world, instead of dealing with history of perhaps Columbus 1492. This is 2020 now, going into 2021. Let's deal with the real history out there: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the history of 1937 riots, all these things, Adonijah, these things that have been taking place in medical marijuana, the real world. So that's my piece for right now, Kareem.
Okay. The strength of a young man. He perceives the problems in the area of education. We have Dr. Tennyson Joseph, who is the academic with the bird's eye view of our Barbadian society, racial divisions in Barbados. Almost all of our panelists, in some form or fashion, have identified a problem, but from where you sit as an academic, is it still a worthwhile issue for Barbadians at this time? And if so, why?
Hi, I'm Kareem and panelists and Barbados and other viewers as a whole. Good evening and thanks for having me. I think what is positive from my viewpoint is that we are actually having this discussion, and of course, as Kareem would have noted in his introduction, it all springs from the Black Lives Matter reinvigoration which took place over very unfortunate circumstances. So there is in fact a global moment now, which we all have to seize. And I think all of the discussion so far suggests that we are in fact seizing this moment. And I want to congratulate Annalee on her bravery and for explaining and discussing her journey with us. And it is an example of that moment being seized. To answer your question directly, Kareem, I think just to contextualize, if both Adonijah and Annalee are coming from a small island, 160 square miles, and they have accounts of themselves and their own personal experiences of not having interaction with people who live no more than 14 miles away from them, generally speaking, then, and of course, structurally and historically, there is a problem. So Rebecca's best, I think, encapsulated for us. He suggests, for example, that between 1492 and 1838, the struggle was for social rights on the part of the majority population. Basically, the right to be recognized as a human being. And we won that right to greater or less extent in 1838. Between 1838 and 1951, the struggle was for political rights. So 1951, you have universal adult suffrage, and of course, if you want to go further, fully let us say, actualized with independence, but still an ongoing process. And since independence, so between 1951 and 1960, roughly speaking, and now, the struggle is for economic rights and economic equality. Now, I've heard Mr. Clarke on the issue of perception, but I want to give some concrete examples to suggest that it may not just be perception. But I want to turn my attention to the state, because Kareem said that I was a student of decolonization. And one of the things that independence promised was the whole promise, Nkrumah, the way Nkrumah had put it, we should seek first the political kingdom, and everything else shall be added on to you. Seek ye first the political kingdom, and everything else shall be added on to you. The reality we are now facing, and the reality that Mr. Bulbia's generation is now facing, is that we have had the political kingdom. We've had, in most cases, in the Caribbean, 45 to 50 years of having won the political kingdom. And those other things are now being struggled for to be added onto us. So let me turn my attention, and I don't want to be too long because we have lots of other people to speak. But just to give some concrete examples of what I mean by it's not just perception. There is, in fact, in other countries, you would see it expressed in terms of a suspicion towards monopolies. So you would have legislation to attack monopolies, and you would have legislation to ensure that you have equal opportunity in terms of employment, in terms of ownership, and so forth. In the Caribbean, we had our independence project, but we never addressed those kinds of issues. I believe that the state, and I think Bulbia's generation, that will have to be their struggle. The state has to intervene at critical points. You cannot start making decisions on the basis of race. I think we discovered that in relation to the Don Blackman versus Carl Williams incident in 1990, in the early 1990s, and that Don Blackman was on this whole idea of empowering the small black man, but he was brought to court for under the Financial Administration Act for using ministerial powers in the wrong way. And the reason for that is very simple. A government cannot start making decisions based on race. To say, I'm going to give these black people some things at the expense of that other group, which we call white people. But there's a way you can do it. If you attack monopolies, in the context of the Caribbean, if you attack monopolies, you are attacking a white ownership structure. Now, Mr. Clarke is indeed correct. There has been, in fact, some movement away from, because Beckles in the 1990s struggle against the mutual was very critical of what he would call interlocking directorships. The same example Mr. Clarke referred to, in which friends would appoint friends and friends would pass business on to friends. That has eased up a little bit, but there still has some work to do. Let me give some examples. We have this view that technology is a great transformer. There are critical points in which new technologies have come in, but the old power structures are able to use their power to prevent a broader economic empowerment. So for example, we see it with the used car dealer versus the old car dealer business. So the new technology called the internet, I can sit at my home and order a vehicle in Japan. And then what would happen? Pressure groups would place pressure on the state, and you would have things like environmental levy and so forth. I'm not saying that these things are not important, but that talk of environmental levy is not so much a concern for the environment. It's a way of preventing that other group who's using the new technology to empower itself. We see it with Airbnb. It's the same thing. I have published on it with my colleague called Troy Lord. So you have the technology called the internet, where we can now put up our little apartments for rent. But then there's a power structure called a Hotel and Tourism Association that would then start raising issues about the quality of the tourism product and so forth. But my view is, if there's a free market system, if a poor tourist from England wants to come to my poor Reiki apartment, then let the free market decide that. But at least I would have a share of the tourism business. But you have an entrenched power group that is actually using non-racial arguments but using very technical arguments to prevent that from happening. And I'll give one last example. I refer to technology. There's another way in which you can do it in relation to when you have new economic opportunities coming. And the marijuana example is a good one. So for example, there was no marijuana industry before. So you can't say that there is any entrenched group that has control over marijuana. But when the new industry is being introduced, here's an opportunity for the state to say, well, we have those historical inequalities. Let us use the new thing that is being introduced as a way of economically democratizing the space. But what do you see?
Dr. Joseph, again, I'm just going to ask you to just hold that thought.
Okay.
We have to take a break. Thank you
But actually, my argument is made.
Quite clear. Thank you so much. Stay with us. When we return, we are going to continue our discussion on race relations in Barbados, Part 2.
Hey mama, hey papa, Emerald City and Carlton.
The dog was eating cat food and barking, meow, meow, meow. The cat was eating dog food and purring, bow, wow, wow. They were eating the wrong brand pet food. So we fed the cat Tesco cat food and fed the dog Tesco dog food. Everything was fine after that. Puss, puss, puss. Proper.
Wow, wow, yummy, yum.
Variety, convenience, and great prices.
Emerald City and Carlton.
Now more than ever, your home is so much more than it was before. It's your office, your classroom, it's your gym, but most importantly, it's your sanctuary. We know that times are difficult, and that's why at CGI, we are making it easier for you to keep your home insurance up to date with attractive rates and payments over 12 months. This hurricane season and every season, your sanctuary will always be secure with CGI. Call us today at 435-2000 or visit us at insurecgi.com for a free quote. CGI, always different and always fast.
We're in your corner, yay. And in our hearts we are with you. We are so grateful for all you do. We want to say thank you. Cause when we need you, you're always there. Risking it all to keep us safe. You are our heroes. So we sing the song for you. No matter the time, you're by our side to always make sure we are secure. Our hearts are filled with thanks, cause you give your all and more. So we send in the love from Sagicor.
Welcome back to our discussion on race relations in Barbados. Before the break, Dr. Joseph left us with quite a bit to unpack. But essentially, the crux of the matter, or the crux of his argument, surrounds the fact that our political administrations have not quite created equitable conditions to allow for empowerment and enfranchisement across the board in Barbados. Just recently, I spoke to Dr. Don Marshall, who is the director of Salices at UE, and he had quite a very similar view. And he said, quote, most of the Syrian and Lebanese came here with their wealth, but when you deal with the African-derived populations, we were victims of terrorism, banditry, denial of Black humanity, and these are the origins. So you cannot have a state emerging out of the colonial and slavery experience that simply allows the market to exist with the private sector being the main engine of growth. At some point, the state must intervene to do more than just correct a historical wrong. The only way to shake up the dominance of a conservative enterprise culture is to create an enabling environment for industrial deepening, new inventions, and value-added approaches to business. I want to bring in the president of the Private Sector Association on this question. Now, you have said that in your opinion, the playing field is rather level. It's just a situation where people need to be given the education, the tools necessary so that when they come to the lending agencies, they have what it takes to get the type of financing that they would need. This argument takes us a bit deeper, and it essentially says that the governments have not done enough to erase a centuries-old established private sector rooted in white and Syrian ownership. Do you think that our governments have done enough to create the equity that is needed?
Well, there's no doubt. We've been independent now for over 50 years, right? 54 years nearly. And we should have had an opportunity to see the black business people take a wider sector, a wider piece of the sector. There's no doubt about that. And we must, I'm not an expert in the field, but I have to ask why. Why is that the case? Why haven't black businessmen been able to bond together and control various and take over various sectors or create new sectors? We have seen it to some degree. Really and truly the retail and distribution sector, we have seen a lot of expansion of black businessmen in that area. But I'm not a political scientist. Dr. Blackman obviously is very much versed in that. But there is some reason why we have not yet been able to create that environment. I wouldn't say, Kareem, that there's a level playing field. I would say that in certain aspects of business in Barbados, there's a level playing field. When it comes to some of the major parts of the economy, the largest construction companies we all know are white owned. Let's be realistic. I'm not hiding anything. But the number of players that make up the rest of the industry are mostly black owned. When it comes to the retail sector, the food and distribution sector, you have the Massey Group, you have the Anson McCall Group, but then you have other players as well. You have the A1s, you have the Jordans, you have the Chanels, you have Popular, you have the Trimart, all that group. So there's a wide distribution sector that is black owned in Barbados. I think the issue is that how does the black Barbadian become a major player? And to me, that has been the biggest challenge. How do black Barbadians bond together and become a big player? You have to have capital to grow. There's no doubt. And Tennyson, I understand what you're saying, but I think you do have to have capital to grow. And even a small white businessman cannot grow without bonding together with other people to get capital to grow. And you will see that, to me, that is where I would like to see a lot more happening in Barbados. A lot more co-ops, a lot more joint ventures, a lot more partnerships, where people can get together. Who is to say that black businessmen can't make a bid on one of the large public companies in Barbados? Why not? Why not? Why can't they do that? But we need to have people banding together. And to me, that is where the capital forces will play. Look, we got over $10 billion in the banks of Barbados. I can guarantee you that doesn't belong to white people. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And you need to understand, why haven't we been able to get that put to play? That money is lying down, making the banks rich. The banks that have it. The credit unions' monies are in the bank, making the banks rich again. We need to understand why we as a people can't band together.
Adonijah a chance to respond to that. Now, he represents a community that is generally considered to be a very enterprising community, the Rastafarian community. Of course, the Rastafarian community is not big business in Barbados. And Adonijah, I just want to throw this to you. Would you acknowledge that black businesses in Barbados have failed in that ability to be able to come together in terms of joint ventures, partnerships, as Edward would have said, to create something bigger that would be able to rival big business in Barbados? Should black shoulder some of the responsibility for that?
I think we need to first understand that when it comes to black business, we're talking about hundreds of years of fracture of all kinds. So I don't think it is reasonable to expect that a people who have been fractured deliberately for so many hundreds of years are going to have the same entrepreneurial spirit. It really amuses me when you hear government saying, well, look, we need to become entrepreneurs. That is the way forward. What kind of history do we have, right? Has our history been one to create union or fracture, right? I think the basic problem in my mind is that we have forgotten what Marcus Garvey showed us. That the way forward for black people is unity, or as Rastafari would say, unity. Yeah? And we need to be able to see clearly that But look at history. Basically, the way you see it, I don't think that black governments have done anything near as radical enough as they needed to do to transform these post-independent societies. They have continued looking to the same markets by and large, right? They have practiced, they have adopted the same kind of practices. It is not reasonable to expect that in the face of that, in the face of history, we would have all of a sudden this thriving black business community, right? What we needed to do, and let me give another example. When there are new opportunities, rather than adopt new systems and strategies, what we do is to repeat the same imbalance. Again, look at the cannabis industry, an industry that has been maintained and supported by poor black people. And along comes government and decides that it's going to have a cannabis industry. And whom does the cannabis industry address? Whose concerns do they address? You're looking to bring in a lot of foreign people, a lot of, well, I don't know if the race is that important in this case, but there are a lot of white people from overseas and so. And the things that are necessary for the average poor black farmer who kept the industry going to have a part of this industry, the chance the opportunity is very, very, very small. You have license fees. I don't think government has actually quoted license fees yet, but I know that some parts of the Caribbean, we're talking about license fees of $250,000.
Wow.
Quite beyond the reach of your average black farmer, right? You have all the things that you have to have in order to be able to get into the industry. You have to have security business and all kinds of things, all beyond the reach of the average black person. So here it is, you have a new industry. And rather than having the industry say, well, okay, let us make this now an opportunity for black people to have a real stake in it. I was very careful to note that the chief official of the Marijuana Licensing Authority even actually said, well, you know, you may not get in at the top level, but you can start in as a laborer. You can start as laborers and work your way up. We went through that with slavery already, and we don't intend to go through that again. Our governments have got to start, this is the point that Tennyson was making. Our governments have got to realize that they have a responsibility, given our history, to make sure that things are level as far as the mass of the people are concerned. But they are not. What they're doing is following the same old pattern again. And as far as concerned, we don't intend to go on the plantation again.
Okay, I want to bring in Dr. Joseph at this point. Do you agree? And I want to take you back to Edward Clarke's suggestion that Barbadian black people can take the onus upon themselves and come together and form partnerships, form cooperatives to pursue even industries like the marijuana industry. Should blacks be shouldering some of the blame, or is Adonijah correct that they're not doing enough?
Well, I'm always very hesitant to say things like, you know, black people they don't know how to approach the banks, because that would suggest that there's something in the DNA that makes approaching a bank problematic. Whenever I hear those kinds of claims, I always pull back from them respectfully, because they are ascribing certain failures to individuals based on racial ascription and so forth, which are always very, very difficult and very, very problematic. I can give personal examples of colleagues of mine of lighter hue who tell me when they go to certain banks, they say, oh, you take the line downstairs? They actually call me up, you know, I went upstairs to this room and the tellers come to you, sit down, the guys come to me and tell me that. And I mean, I don't have to disclose about myself, but in terms of salary and so forth, mine is probably on par better than theirs. But when they get to the bank, because they're not from Barbados, they're from other countries, people actually approach them and tell them, no, you have to take this line and so forth. So there are, in fact, structural issues. I think Annalee was pointing to those, that there are structural issues that are historical, that are rooted. On the question of whether or not blacks can come together, I'm sure black businessmen do, in fact, come together. There are, in fact, a lot of discussions about the credit unions as amazing examples of let us call them black enterprise with huge amounts of savings and so forth. These are not to be brushed aside. And these are people historically engaged in friendly societies. And all of these are historical examples of black people coming together to put it in the way that you wish. I don't think we can. I don't like to begin from that liberal argument of blaming individuals. The notion that the system is almost perfect, but it is individual failures. And in this case, it is the race as a group that is failing. There are structural, institutional, and structural hurdles that have to be addressed, because in this whole context of Black Lives Matter, we're now discovering that there is something called white institutional privilege. And one of the failures, I think, is that of liberalism. Liberalism always was based on the idea of individual rights and individual liberty. But liberalism never addressed the issue of equality. If you go through all the famous philosophers, in fact, many of them were inherently racist. They spoke about freedom and liberty and so forth, and they always kind of failed at the level of when it came to the issue of race and racial equality. What has happened now in the last few months is that is being opened up. I will not, because again, I also respectfully, I don't have enough information. Maybe colleagues of ours from management can probably assist us there, of black conglomerates and black enterprise. But I know historically that there are huge institutional structures that have to be addressed. Another example, Adonijah is talking about.
Stick a pin, Dr. Joseph. I just want to bring in Annalee, sorry, because she was nodding a bit earlier. What's your take on this aspect of the discussion? What's on your mind?
Well, I was just, thinking about what Adonijah was saying, that you've got a history where for over 3 centuries, I mean, this is a bizarre space that we live in, because it's one of the only places in the world where the economy preceded the society. And I've always been intrigued by that it's such a strange way in which our context was designed by Europeans to create an economy before the social space was even formed. And you have that for several centuries, where every decision has been made for this space externally to, through an extractive economy, generate wealth for people from that are living elsewhere. And also within the cultural sector, this is something, it's like what Adonijah is saying about the marijuana business that hopefully will be developed in small island developing states to transform their economies and to empower young Black farmers or, Black farmers across the region. But in the cultural sector as well, there's also this push about the orange economy. And, the issue really is with the artists. They can't pull it together and become entrepreneurial. But you don't become entrepreneurial overnight after 3.5 centuries of every decision being made about the product, the price, the market. And also everybody isn't an entrepreneur. So, I think we have similar discussions in the cultural sector where artists feel as though they're often being criticized for not being entrepreneurial enough. But there isn't also a full infrastructure or scaffolding to support the advancement of artists in this country, I think, at this time. So I think that there's some overlaps with what Adonijah and Tennyson are saying.
Okay. I just want to bring in Tahir before we go to the break. You, again, the youngest person on the panel, when you speak with your friends at the University of the West Indies and in other spaces about movements toward business ownership, what generally is the perspective of the Black persons, and does it differ from how persons in your East Indian community treat to business? Do you recognize a difference in mindsets and attitudes, or is that something that's changing?
Well, Kareem, Barbados is now 53 years of independence. We have already proven ourselves on the world stage. So it's now for us to now develop and look for new ways and innovative ways to develop our country on a whole. Obviously, you have a history in mind and what would have taken place, and now looking to move forward and develop. Amongst the youth now, they're taking a more entrepreneurial approach. They will more prefer to work on their own for themselves rather than go into a 9-to-4 business. That's the reality situation. They would prefer to sit down at home and make money rather than go into a business where you have to work from constrained hours or whatever the case may be. So what I'm saying is, I think Barbados relook our main income of the economy, and look at creative and innovative ways of developing the economy on a whole, where everyone really has a part to play in this. So for instance, look at COVID. The COVID situation would have called for a lot of creativity and innovation. Why in 2020 on a large scale we can't have a fast food restaurant doing delivery service to Barbados, to a home in Barbados? Why is this? We want to operate at first world and second world countries, but no, COVID came and businesses would have had to go on the creative and innovative route of gaining an income, and we've seen this across the economy, regardless of black, white, regardless of what color or culture background you're from. So I think we need to continue looking to develop our economy in innovative and creative ways, utilizing the youth, moving forward together, all hands on deck.
Here. We're going to take another break, and when we get back, we are going to continue this discussion. There's quite a bit to unpack. Just stay with us.
All in. This means something very special to our Sagicor team across the region. It means dedication, it means commitment, and it means everyone doing their part and making it count. Right now, it is more important than ever for us to unite as Caribbean people and work together in the fight against COVID-19 and to truly be our brother's keeper. Taking care of each other by helping the elderly in your neighborhood to get critical supplies, by remembering the homeless who rely on our help to survive, to protect and provide for the children in our communities for whom the next meal is not a foregone conclusion. We can still show these types of support while practicing social distancing by leaving our donations 3 feet away. Trust me, they will still know that you care. When times are good, we sometimes forget that we need each other. Today, we need to recognize that if we work together, look after each other, help each other, then together we will win this fight. We are one Caribbean, and we are all in this together. In fact, we need to be all in.
Our beautiful, polite customers expect good service and a wonderful shopping experience. Our staff is courteous, attentive, and polite always. We thank you for shopping with us. Please come again and again.
Variety, convenience, and great prices.
Emerald City and Carlton.
Now more than ever, your home is so much more than it was before. It's your office, your classroom, it's your gym, but most importantly, it's your sanctuary. We know that times are difficult, and that's why at CGI, we are making it easier for you to keep your home insurance up to date with attractive rates and payments over 12 months. This hurricane season and every season, your sanctuary will always be secure with CGI. Call us today at 435-2000 or visit us at insurecgi.com for a free quote. CGI, always different and always fast.
Okay, thank you. We're back with our discussion on race relations in Barbados. When we left at the break, we were talking about black enfranchisement, enfranchisement on the whole, and the role that race plays in the development of business in Barbados. Now, I want to bring back in Dr. Joseph. One of the suggestions, and when we started, you spoke about the various stages of our development, whether that be from slavery, colonialism, the movement towards adult suffrage, the right to vote, and you're saying that we've kind of been a bit stagnant over the past 50 years, where equity in terms of economic development has not occurred. And the suggestion from both you and Adonijah is that our governments ought to do a bit more. My question to you is, do they have a vested, and I'm not speaking about a specific administration, I'm speaking very collectively here, do our Barbadian and Caribbean governments have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo? The reason that I'm asking that is because there's a perception that much of the campaign financing, for instance, comes from an old established business class. So my question to you, do our governments have a vested interest in maintaining the economic status quo?
Yeah, I would not even go as far as saying it is as direct as a link between people who finance campaigns and people who call the political shots. It's a little more complex than that. It has to do also with a certain degree of, I would call it, intellectual laziness on their part. And of course, economic systems are in fact entrenched and have a kind of built-in conservatism. So let us say, for example, sugar collapses or bananas collapse. Then the next thing you do is what is the easiest source of foreign exchange? And then you would say tourism. So it is a complex issue, not necessarily to be blamed on individual actors or political parties, but again, it has to do with a kind of structural, and as Adonijah was saying, there has been a lack of, let's just call it revolutionary innovation in the post-colonial period, and partly because I would also say there has not been much of a demand from below, because very often change. Maurice Bishop used to say, and he was a lawyer himself, that change doesn't take place in the law courts or in the parliament, but change takes place on the streets. So that's why I am so excited about this moment. This moment is a very important one, and it's a very important moment of change, and we dare not miss that opportunity. So there's an element of that, what I would call intellectual laziness. I can give another concrete example. We saw it with, let us say, another new innovation, Ross University. So you have a new, let's call it a new thing being introduced in Barbados. And I'm from the Eastern Caribbean. The model we would have seen, again, based on history, would be to allow small people, homeowners, to rent their rooms and so forth to the students. That was the model in Portsmouth, Dominica. But for some reason in Barbados, there's a kind of entrenched economic elitism that is almost the instinctive response on the part of the state. So Ross University came in there, and it was just, again, what I was saying from the very beginning, Kareem, a suspicion. You should have a suspicion towards monopolies. Because when you don't have that suspicion towards monopolies, you are actually facilitating the continuation of the old entrenched structure. If the government had a suspicion towards monopoly, it would say, but look, we have Ross University. How is it going to fall and benefit to as wide a range of the population as possible? So the first thing I would say, let the students rent the homes. Let the students take the buses. Let the students take the taxis. Let the students rent cars if they choose, or buy cars if they choose, and so forth. But so you have to. So it is a kind of intellectual laziness, a kind of sense that. But again, to be quite fair, because we have to be balanced. There's something called the economy and foreign exchange and having taxation and so forth, having revenue and so forth, which are always of the concern of government, which allow them to take the easy route out, which perhaps may be answering Edward Clarke's question earlier of why. The reason is these are entrenched historical systems. So bananas collapse, sugar collapses, tourism. Tourism is the most colonial of possibilities. Tourism is, and then we talk about the plantation. Tourism is a representation of the plantation model all over again. External expatriate ownership, local managerial browns, white waiters and black waitresses and waiters. No space for the ordinary person to participate. At this with bananas, you could say the small farmers had a little stake. Maybe even sugar, you could argue, the small farmers had a stake and so forth. But unless our states begin to think that it is a priority to always have the eye on, let me democratize, let me enfranchise the majority, let me have a suspicion towards monopoly, let me break the old historically entrenched ways in which wealth and power were distributed, the problem will not be solved. And there are ways, finally, Kareem, you can do it also legislatively. So as I was saying, in other countries, you have discussions about equal opportunity acts. In the Caribbean, you would say, but it's a man's private business. He can hire who he wants. He can employ who he wants. He can subcontract to who he wants. But in another part of the world, you could take them to court for being discriminatory, and for not having transparent ways of engaging in business. And by the way, many of them they survive on state state jobs. That's why I'm always very, I know Edward might not like it when I say that. I'm always very critical of this myth about a private sector-led growth. 95% of what we call private sector activity is the state they rely on for support. The state has to give the road contractors don't make their money building private homes and building big high rises for private people. They're building roads and bridges and so forth. And so the state, if we use the taxpayers' money to help them survive, then the state should have a say in terms of equity. Or you could actually decide that the same way you have when you look at things like the question of bidding, you could also agree that you've given one too often or one has gotten too much, and you can decide after 3 or 4 bids, let me give it to somebody else, or I can break down the job into smaller bits and subcontract. All these are things a state can do. But if you do it the way you continue doing it, obviously those with historical advantages will continue to benefit and so forth.
Edward Clarke, your response to quite a heavy perspective.
Well, listen. I don't agree with Tennyson that the private sector is so heavily dependent on government. It used to be. The private sector of Barbados is not that heavily dependent on government. But government is a big player. Government is a big employer. Government builds roads, they build bridges, they build buildings. So yes, the private sector builds them for them. But when you come to talk about tax handouts and so on, listen, whoever goes to attract foreign investment has to have an incentive to attract foreign investment. The local enterprises that are playing in this market don't get handouts on tax issues from government. We have seen the changes in government tax rate. Yes, but every single player is going to benefit from that. I don't agree in handouts. I mean, that's me personally. I believe in a level playing field. One of the issues we face in Barbados is that when it comes to major projects, there are few players who can perform on major projects in a short time frame. I understand Tennyson's thing about you need to have some contractors and you can put smaller fellows together and work and so on. That is a very difficult thing to manage, and people do try it. It is not always successful, but it does happen. But when it comes to major projects, larger companies tend to want to work together or join together with another large company because it's easier to manage a project like that. But I don't think, Tennyson, that there is all this handouts that people are having. I want to go back to tourism though, because I don't understand where Tennyson is going with tourism. Yeah, okay, you're suffering from a lack of tourism now with COVID. But you can't change it overnight. Let's be realistic. You do not change an economy overnight. Adonijah and the medical marijuana will help in some degree down the road. It will help. The RE systems will help coming in, which is another area I hope that black businessmen can get involved and the wider Barbadian public can get involved, not just businessmen, the ones that have the savings and the bank accounts. Get involved in the renewable energy sector. That is a new sector that we should be seeing Barbadians taking a major play. That's what I want to see. I want to see that happening. But I don't think that we can say the tourism sector is like the plantocracy. Tennyson, I can't agree with that on that one at all, because there are a lot of black hoteliers in Barbados as well, and a couple just built new hotels again. So, there's no doubt that there are major white hotel owners, and that's the reality. That's the truth. But I can't see how you could compare it to the plantocracy system. Plantocracy is a different ball game, and you can't compare the two of them, in my opinion.
Okay, I was referring to the structural, the way it's instituted structurally. But I want to latch on to one of Edward's points about renewable energy, and that is another critical example of what I was trying to say about a new innovation that is not allowed to become an opportunity for economic democratization. So, in my own naive way, and many of us, I assume, when we heard about new energy, we're moving away from fossil fuels. We're getting our energy from the sun. You know what I was assuming as the old socialist that I am? I was assuming that you would have, this is the you have playing fields, and you have the government providing playing fields. You would have solar parks. So your community, St. Philip, would have a solar park supplying the community. Your community in St. George would have a solar park supplying the community. Because it is free, it comes from the sun. It's not like the old fossil fuel where you have to have expensive drilling operations and so forth. And again, what do we see? So that instead of using that moment, a new technological innovation which can actually transform the world, using it to entrench old patterns. So what do we have? Private sector firms installing photovoltaic thing on an individual house basis. So of course the government gives you a $50,000 rebate on your income tax, but that is basically to assist the business. So if I have enough money, I would go and get it and so forth. So why not think the other side, which is we have a new system, a new technological innovation that can democratize energy provision. It can make it cheaper. The state can intervene the same way the state build playing fields for boys who don't have backyards to play cricket. The state can build solar parks for people to get a cheaper source of energy and transform the country as a whole.
But I want to jump in here, Kareem, before you go over to someone else. Tennyson, what I'm saying, the state doesn't even have to do it, Tennyson. We got enough money in the banking sector, the banking system, that Barbadians, black Barbadians, white, yellow, all Barbadians, but black Barbadians can become major players in renewable energy sector.
I agree. But the state has to legislate, Edward. The state has to legislate. The state is giving innovations for the individual photovoltaic. The state can put institutional mechanisms to make it easier for the black, brown, white, and yellow to use the new technology as they should. But they're not intellectually broad enough. They're not thinking along those lines. That's our difficulty in this post-colonial period.
Okay. Adonijah, an opportunity to interject here. What's your take on this discussion? And I want to bring you back to the first question I asked, because I think you've made your perspective quite clear on whether government is doing enough. But do you think that governments have a vested interest in maintaining this perceived status quo of the maintenance of the white Syrian business class in Barbados, even when it comes to these new innovations like photovoltaic, renewable energy, marijuana, etc.? Do you think there's a vested interest by our governments to maintain that?
Well, the answer would seem to be that the government is very much, successive governments are very much interested in maintaining the status quo. I'm really interested in the fact that Tennyson mentioned alternative energy. How long ago was it that Ira Barrow built the wind turbine up in Lambert in St. Lucie? When I was about 8 years old, I had a cousin who used to run his radio off batteries, right? And a windmill that he had in his yard. Now, he wasn't any Nobel Prize winner. He wasn't any great scientist. He was just an ordinary black man who uses intelligence and work that could be done. And that was in the 50s, right? So how come now, so many years afterwards, no kind of thought has been given in our own energy? We should not be dealing with fossil fuel now at all. Not with the sea and the sun and all these kind of things around us. The difficulty lays in the fact that we needed to reimagine ourselves, right? In post-independent Caribbean, we needed to reimagine ourselves and see the things that we have, which could make work for us. Listen, when I was about 9 years old, up above me in Long Bay in St. Philip, there was the remnants of an aloe plantation, right? Now, every hanging that we look at in the world, you can see aloe barbadiensis. It is a Bajan plant. I mean, in all these years, nobody ever considered, well, something, this is our plant. People from all over the world using it to make hand cream. We can make our own hand cream and proclaim it to be the original. It is a question of lack of imagination. We see, since colonialism, all that has happened is that the new players have put on the jacket that was worn by the colonialists, and they're practicing the same policies. There has been no imagination, there has been no imagining of what we have and how to use it, because it suits somebody to keep the status quo as it is. And as the status quo is, your average black Barbadian does not have any stake in it at all. I wonder if these people feel that this thing can go on forever. Because it really can't. People need to be included, and there is space for inclusion. But we have got to understand first that this is a Barbados that belongs to everybody, that all people have a need to be able to make an input into it, right? And see their stake realized. It is really, really frustrating. Again, I go back to Marcus Garvey. Garvey showed us the way years ago.
Annalee, you had a question. I remember that.
Yeah, I was just curious, Tennyson, if there has been. I mean, I remember I went to the Black Lives Matter march a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers made a statement that all of the businesses in Bridgetown were white owned, and all of the businesses, all the cash is white cash in Barbados. And I wondered whether there has been research done at Cave Hill to demonstrate shifts that have happened to show the advancement of Black businesses in Barbados, so that rather than just dealing with perception, we actually have facts to show that things have shifted from 1920 to 1966 to 2020. Like, what are the facts around the ownership of Black businesses, the micro and small businesses? There must be thousands of them. So that, because I think that's important to give people a sense of empowerment that things have shifted. I mean, and I think also I was going to just add to some of what has been said, that even though we're independent and have a Black government, it doesn't mean that there are really radical ideas coming through. So I think that's that kind of model of leadership that we've had for such a long time is also within the current governance structure. And because the color of their skin has changed, it doesn't mean that they're doing really radical things. But I'm really curious about the research, and I wonder if that exists so that we can say these things with facts.
Yeah, the research exists. I would have been happy if one of my colleagues in management was answering you, but I'm aware of the work of Celia Koch. Celia Koch, DC, is a very good friend of mine, a sociologist. Dr. Koch was doing a lot of work on corporate ownership in Barbados, and she did a very wonderful book on behalf of the Goddard's group called The Rise of the Phoenix. I think every business person should read it. And much of her work was on the transition of the corporate sector, the transition from plantation to corporate. Her PhD thesis was on that topic. On the more recent question, or the more specific question about the Black ownership, my friends and colleagues in management might probably know more of it than I do, but I think Henderson Carter is a business historian. I could say that there were basically two business historians at Cave Hill, Celia Koch, who passed away, and Henderson Carter. But I can't answer you in terms of contemporary work, in terms of looking at them as a sector. I was actually thinking, and preparing for the program, I mean, Ed was asking, what areas do Black businessmen have a kind of control over? And coming to mind would be things like the transport sector, and the fisheries and so forth. And of course, that would be space for coming together, Kareem, that's the language you were looking for. But I know there are one or two areas like the transport sector, I know for sure, and the fisheries sector. I know there's a lot of you could call it almost a lot of black entrepreneurship in those areas. But on the more contemporary research, Annalee, on Black businesses per se, I can't give you a proper answer. Right. But I can point you to Celia Koch's work and to Henderson Carter's work on business history.
Okay.
Kareem, just Annalee here.
We'll have to get back to it when we come back from the break. I'm gonna allow you to respond, but we really do have to take a break at this time. So just stay with us, and we will hear from Edward Clarke when we come back.
Now more than ever, your home is so much more than it was before. It's your office, your classroom, it's your gym, but most importantly, it's your sanctuary. We know that times are difficult, and that's why at CGI, we are making it easier for you to keep your home insurance up to date with attractive rates and payments over 12 months. This hurricane season and every season, your sanctuary will always be secure with CGI. Call us today at 435-2000 or visit us at insurecgi.com for a free quote. CGI, always different and always fast.
Hey mama, hey papa, Emerald City and Carlton.
The dog was eating cat food and barking, meow, meow, meow. The cat was eating dog food and purring, bow, wow, wow. They were eating the wrong brand pet food. So we fed the cat Tesco cat food and fed the dog Tesco dog food. Everything was fine after that. Puss, puss, puss. Proper.
Variety, convenience, and great prices.
Emerald City and Carlton.
Proper.
We're in your corner, yay. And in our hearts we are with you. We are so grateful for all you do. We wanna say thank you. 'Cause when we need you, you're always there. Risking it all to keep us safe. You are our heroes, so we sing the song for you. No matter the time, you're by our side to always make sure we are secure. Our hearts are filled with thanks, 'cause you give your all and more. So we send in the love from Sagicor. Yes, Sagicor, sending our love to you.
Okay, so we are back on our discussion on race relations in Barbados. Edward Clarke, before the break, you had a point to make. Feel free.
Yeah, I heard Annalee's comment just now, and misinformation is a terrible thing. Back in 2016, a paper was written. There are about 8,500 small and micro businesses in Barbados at that time, 2016. Well, now there must be a lot less because of the economy, etc. But let's say there are at least 7,000, I would imagine still. They employ, the 8,500, I think, employed almost 50,000 people, close to 50,000 people in Barbados. Look at the number 8,500. 5% of Barbados is supposed to be white. That's about 14,000 white people. So majority of these SBAs, these small micro businesses must be owned by Black Barbadians. So there must be some economy taking place there. But to employ over 45,000 people, is a huge player in the market. We have about 126,000 people employed in Barbados. That's already the workforce of Barbados. And the government employs maybe about 21,000 of them. And private enterprise employs about just under 80,000 of them. The rest of people are self-employed, sort of thing, about 25,000. So the distribution of work is there to see. But when you have 75 to 8,000 small businesses operating, you would know that there are big players. They're employing their own Barbadian people. Blacks and whites are employing Barbadians. So the small business sector is a huge player. I don't know the percentage that's owned by Black or white or of Indian descent. But there is some research that should be done, I think. But there's no doubt that the small business, the small micro sector is a huge player in the economy.
Okay. All right. So before we take some comments, we want to go to Tahir. Tahir had a point that he wanted to make. You have the floor.
Yes, Kareem. I think it goes back to also the education system, as I would have alluded to in my first point. I think the education system needs to take a holistic approach for students and for young people coming up. We need to see the inclusion of sports, culture, the arts, drama, and then this can, in essence, build our economy out. And we talk about racism, but look at the Royal West Indies cricket team in 1950s, 60s, and 70s, dominated the world as a Black team. And that was not something that was common back in that time. And look at the role they continue to play now in this Black Lives Matter movement. Look at this role sports has played, which have brought people together on one common goal to support a team, support a next team, and they battle it out on the field. And I think if we could look to develop our a multifaceted approach to our economy, we're utilizing sports, culture, the arts, different aspects. We talked about renewable energy. I think that's where we can now start to see a full development of a Barbadian society and a Barbadian economy on the world stage.
Okay, thank you. All right, so in our comments, Barbadians have been quite active, and we're gonna read some of the comments, some of the things that Barbadians have been saying. Glenn Level says the problem with Barbados is that we never thought to decolonize. We saw a kind of amicable transition from one state to the other, paying little regard for the history of our people and the ill effects of the colonization, which have completely placed our minds in a state of inertia. Decolonization is never easy. It's never painless. Decolonization is upheaval. Very interesting thoughts. Sorry, Amy Thompson says Barbados demographics. I'm not sure the source of these statistics, but 92.4 black, 3.1% mixed, 2.7% white, 1.3% South Asian, 0.4% East Indian, and Middle Easterners. Barbados business and wealth distribution, highest to lowest, white 92.4%, East Indian 3.1%, Middle Easterners 2.7%, South Asian 1.3, 0.4% black and mixed. This is what institutional racism looks like. Now, again, I'm not sure the source of these statistics, but that's her perception of the wealth distribution in Barbados. Ayo Ololara. Okay. Ayo Ololara Ifoma Nomande says, we are too afraid to discuss our history. Growing up, these conversations were taboo and are still taboo in certain spaces. People are afraid of being blacklisted, but there should be no need to fear. Very interesting thoughts, and it goes to show that these discussions that we're having are indeed important if we want to move the country forward. Now, moving on in our discussion, I would like to introduce labor. Now, we don't have any trade union leaders on our panel tonight, but certainly I would like to discuss the issue of labor. And Dr. Joseph would have alluded to the breakdown of labor within the tourism sector specifically. But on this topic, I'd like to introduce Annalee Davis, who again was born and raised on a plantation that was active. Of course, on that plantation, could you break down for me what the division of labor looked like on that plantation? Or Dr. Joseph is saying that in some aspects of our economy, there are still aspects of the plantation system that we see today. Do you see any similarities after you break down the plantation system that you grew up in? Do you see any similarities with how labor and employers operate today in the Barbadian workforce?
We lived in the house. The white people lived in the house. The people that worked on the plantation and cut cane were black. At some point, there was importation of manual labor from some of the OECS countries in Guyana when there was a fall off, I think, in the black labor force not wanting to work in agriculture because the educational system was such that people had the capacity to make different choices. I can't, when I think about how that plantation system continues to exist today, I would say it exists in notions of hierarchy, ideas around legitimacy, people, who belongs, who's included, who's excluded, those kinds of ideas. I mean, I can't speak about the labor force in a more kind of, I suppose, practical kind of way that a trade unionist would. I guess when I think about tourism, there's a really interesting book called Eye on the Tropics by Krista Thompson, and she speaks about this transition to tourism as a kind of a project that was supported in her research by Bahamian and Jamaican governments who were trying to transform the Caribbean from this sort of backwater where people would come and get malaria and die, or they were afraid to come out to a place where they thought was populated with wild black savages, for example. And this mission to kind of convert this wild space into this tropical paradise. I think this is a very interesting book to read and a kind of an interesting thesis on how that transition has happened and the way in which tourism we've gone from the monoculture of sugarcane to a tourist economy, which we're seeing now under COVID is we're in a very vulnerable position because of that, because of a lack of diversity in our economy and also the impact of that on food security. So I think the plantation continues to exist in that way of thinking, that kind of governance. Tennyson has spoken very articulately about that, the kind of monopoly. So and also in race, in terms of race and class. And even though we think maybe the issue is classism and it's not racism, we're still seeing that people are choosing to live in these kind of separate social spheres in what I think is a social apartheid. That is a vestige of the plantation system.
Okay, Dr. Joseph, your thoughts, aside from the tourism industry, and I mean, the comparison between the literal plantation a few decades ago and our workforce today might be a tad bit trivial, but do you see similarities outside of tourism between the plantation system and the Barbadian workforce model, so to speak?
Well, we have to be aware, though, that it's also changing. I mean, the argument I was making was rooted in Lloyd Best and the New World Group, and the whole argument of the plantation economy model, which I think was a well-established theory to explain Caribbean society. So I'm not sure we should. I really want to go at length to defend it here, but it actually explains the institutional makeup of the society of the society, and you can see it right across. There is transformation. I want to add another side to the discussion, though, and I want to latch on to Volbia's comment about the creative industries and new aspects. So that is another example of what I was trying to say when I was speaking of breaking monopolies. So if you want to transform, you can look at what are the areas in which you could say that particular sector, the Black population, has some comparative advantages. And one of the clearest areas in which we have a clear comparative advantage is at the level of creativity of the people. In fact, Rex Nettleford spoke about it as what he would call it, our own innate. He said we don't have huge cathedrals and we have no big buildings, but every you can't walk 2 miles or half a mile if you don't encounter a creative artist. Now, again, the government have been talking about the creative industries as a new space. That is a huge, and I think Annalee agreed with me, that is a huge and important space. Sports, as Taher is mentioning. But again, I want to give an example. Again, I know I'm bashing the private sector a lot, but I want to show you what I mean by an inability to even act in their own best interest because of racism. And I know I got into trouble some time ago with a leading sector Barbadian population for giving the example of Sanford, Alan Sanford and his T20 tournament. Adam Sanford is an American. He's not native Caribbean. He was an American, and he came to the Caribbean. America has no cricket culture, but he saw the business opportunity in, let us call it, a source of wealth that existed since the late 1800s in the Caribbean, and as Taher mentioned, in which Black people were globally dominant. Nobody in the Caribbean private sector saw in that a business opportunity because they lacked that innovative spirit which we associate with a bourgeoisie anywhere. In fact, the Caribbean bourgeoisie is a backward bourgeoisie in its inability to seize opportunities. Now look at Sanford's project. Sanford's project was actually copied by the Indian businessmen. It's true he's in prison, so we should be talking about him too much. But everything about the IPL was taken from Sanford. The dancing girls, the fireworks, the people talking to the players on the field. These are innovations in cricket. What did Sanford do? He had Michael Holding, all of the black people who our own power brokers in the Caribbean would never have seen as business equals, would never have seen in them the creative potential, would never have seen them as directors in their companies. They were directors of Sanford's company. And as soon as Sanford fell, who picked it up? The Indian businessmen. And who financed it? The Bollywood stars. So the creative industries is so Rihanna. Rihanna is an example of that potential right here in Barbados. So talk about wealth creation, innovation, her own fashion line, her own cosmetics line. She is a Black Barbadian business woman. And she is not from the traditional sector. She could not have been from the traditional sector because that was close to her. She is part of the new. So all of the cricketers, Suleiman Ben, every single one of them, Jason Holder, represent that new business person. That's the future of Caribbean business. That's the future of the black business person around the creative industries, around sports. And I know Bulbia is doing his work on that because he has his eye to the future. That is the future of the Caribbean, and it will not be the tourism sector. By the way, speaking of tourism, and Bulbia, you're talking about coronavirus. Not happened in St. Lucia. No tourists are coming to the country. You know what the government did? The government used the hotels as quarantine. You see what I mean by institutional power structures that allow for entrenched power to continue? So in the height of coronavirus, so they invested in hotels. We are always told that you are entrepreneurs, you take risks. You took a bad risk because you invested in a hotel and it crashed because of coronavirus. But yet still the government is coming to your rescue. And then everyone tells me, don't talk about handouts. I can't think of a clearer handout than that. No tourists coming to the country, but you give all the hotels, you use them as quarantine for anybody coming to the country. In Barbados, to be quite fair, Barbados used schools. Barbados opened the point in St. Lucie and the point in Paragon, not in St. Lucia. So in every Caribbean country, you have those examples of that failure of the state or that state entrenching power. But I would say though, I know you asked me about labor, but I was answering you in a sense to tell you that these are workers too, that they are creative workers. Our cricketers are creative workers. Our musicians are creative workers. They're not the old traditional labor force that you're looking for in terms of somebody on an assembly line or cutting cane and looking for a union to represent them. They are they're the future of the Caribbean. So the young people who are into computer science will be into computer engineering and video games and so forth. That's the future of the Caribbean. That's the basis upon which we can use this Black Lives Matter movement to democratize our spaces and to economically transform. And it'll be interesting to see how the traditional private sector relate to and view these groups now that they are emerging and coming to the fore. Who discovered Rihanna? Was it any Caribbean local business person who discovered Rihanna? But she was right here going to Commonwealth School, singing like all the other young girls and boys sing in the region, dancing like all the other young boys dance in the region. Our private sector couldn't see them as people to invest in.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. I see that here, but I really want to allow Ed Clarke to respond to this because, again, Tennyson, Dr. Joseph seems to have done quite a bit of thinking about how, quote unquote, backward our private sector is, and he's made that clear. And I really need to give Ed Clarke the opportunity to respond to this. Has our private sector missed the boat?
I think we missed the boat on being technologically advanced. I don't think we have missed it. We are late. We are slow. I can't comment on Rihanna. I mean, really and truly, Rihanna is one of a special kind. But and thankfully, I would say thankfully, she wasn't discovered locally for her state and for Barbados' state. But really and truly, I do agree with Tennyson in the sense that the new economy is the new Barbadians. You know, the new young Barbadians are going to drive this economy. The old private enterprise and way of thinking is not going to drive Barbados into the 2050, 2030, 2040, 2050. We got to be realistic, and that's a given. And I really want to see these young Barbadians given an opportunity. That's why I say I think technology is going to be a huge driver, whether it's the creative arts, whether it's musicians, the artists, any creative artists, but then all the service providers, all the different services, the highly skilled service providers that we have, whether ITC folks or whatever, architects, designers, engineers. Technology is going to be the driver. Barbados market is way too small for Barbadians to truly succeed on a service level. We have to do global 360. There's a whole world out there for us. And Tennyson, I agree, is a new economy that's going to put Barbados where it needs to be. The tourism sector isn't going to do it. The plantocracy is gone. The sugarcane is dying. As we all know, the old manufacturing sector isn't going to do it. A whole new economy has to take place. And that's why I really want to see young people coming through. And, I really looking forward to seeing, and when you young people come out of university, that you come up with the entrepreneurial mindset that you don't want to work for anybody. I want to use my creative skills, creative thinking, and go there and do a market to the global market. You will not make it marketing to the Barbados market. Let's face that. All right. Maybe to the wider regional market, yes. But technology is going to do it for us. And that's where I think that the government needs to focus a lot of attention, digitization of this economy, all through it, government and private sector, all through it.
All right, we are running very low on time. Very happy to see some common ground. But I just want to give Tahir the opportunity to make his point before we take the final break.
And I think I agree fully with what Mr. Joseph has said and Edward. I think that the young people are coming up and they have understood the fact that Barbados is on the world stage already. So it's now to develop new ways of innovation and to build the economy. And let's look at sports. Dr. Joseph spoke on Alan Stanford, but let's look at the CPL, for example. 23.5 million US was pumped into the Barbados economy last year, just from the CPL alone. 2 years ago, when the English came to the Caribbean, 80 million US in 4 days. So let's look at the surroundings when there's a sporting event in Barbados, not only at the national level or international level, but on a community level. In the communities, when there's a sporting event, football competition, cricket competition, everyone gets a buzz around it. The canteen operators get some money, the fruit sellers get money, the candy sellers make some money as well. So everyone, and then when you go to the international level, when international teams come in, or there's an international event, the taxi operators, the hoteliers, the bars, you name it, everyone gets a benefit and a piece of the cookie when it comes to international events coming to Barbados, especially with sports. And I would have made the fact when the English came to the Caribbean 2 years ago, 80 million US in 4 days. And this was right across the board from the ground right the way to the top. So I think that this is the way we need to go. And this is how Barbados will now begin to develop. And I think the conversation has begun, and the youth have understood the fact that Barbados has proven itself on the world stage. It's now a matter of developing itself on the world stage. It's no longer proving ourselves any longer.
Okay. Leadership from the young man. Thank you. We're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to hear the final thoughts from our panelists as we begin to wrap up this discussion, this second edition of Race Relations in Barbados.
All in. This means something very special to our Sagicor team across the region. It means dedication, it means commitment, and it means everyone doing their part and making it count. Right now, it is more important than ever for us to unite as Caribbean people and work together in the fight against COVID-19 and to truly be our brother's keeper. Taking care of each other by helping the elderly in your neighborhood to get critical supplies, by remembering the homeless who rely on our help to survive, to protect and provide for the children in our communities for whom the next meal is not a foregone conclusion. We can still show these types of support while practicing social distancing by leaving our donations 3 feet away. Trust me, they will still know that you care. When times are good, we sometimes forget that we need each other. Today, we need to recognize that if we work together, look after each other, help each other, then together we will win this fight. We are one Caribbean, and we are all in this together. In fact, we need to be all in.
Our beautiful, polite customers expect good service and a wonderful shopping experience. Our staff is courteous, attentive, and polite always. We thank you for shopping with us. Please come again and again.
Variety, convenience, and great prices.
Emerald City and Carlton.
Now more than ever, your home is so much more than it was before. It's your office, your classroom, it's your gym, but most importantly, it's your sanctuary. We know that times are difficult, and that's why at CGI, we are making it easier for you to keep your home insurance up to date with attractive rates and payments over 12 months. This hurricane season and every season, your sanctuary will always be secure with CGI. Call us today at 435-2000 or visit us at insurecgi.com for a free quote. CGI, always different and always fast.
Okay, so we're back with the final segment of our discussion on race relations in Barbados. We're going to be wrapping it up right now, and I just want to throw out some final words for each of the panelists to just sum up the discussion. Of course, we've been able to agree on the fact that we need to move towards a more equitable Barbados. This evening, the discussion mainly was in the area of business, and of course, each person came with a different perspective, but the goal, the intention is the same. And in 30 seconds, I just want to ask each panelist to provide us with some solutions, a roadmap forward. And I want to start with Adonijah.
Is to liberate our people, liberate our people. When I say that, I mean give our people the opportunity to express themselves economically, culturally, right? And create a new paradigm and get rid of the old paradigm in which we see everything through the lenses of the plantation, right? Let us realize that we have to empower our people, and we have the ability to do it. Just give the people the chance, give them an infrastructure, a framework that does not constrict them, right? Which is not against them from the beginning, and let the people do what they do naturally. Because we have the ability, we have the talent. As a people, we survive some of the most horrific things in history. We can survive this safely.
30 seconds. You're a visual artist and a Barbadian business person. Your thoughts on the way forward?
Well, I think the financial institutions need to adapt to serve the cultural sector and the new technologies that are emerging. That's one thing. And well, as an artist, I just launched, for example, last evening, Lewy Talk, Real Conversations on Race and Class in Barbados. And I think culture has the capacity to bring people together. Discussions have the capacity to allow us to understand each other better. I do know that living racially segregated lives limits the fullness of who we are, and being in relationship with other people allows us to become more fully who we are. So I think the art certainly has a role to play, as does discussion. So I'm thankful for this platform and the opportunity to share that with all of you.
Of race relations as a very important one. In 30 seconds, just tell me, what should we use this moment to do? Where do we go from here?
Okay, before I answer you, just very quickly, one of your viewers had asked me to repeat the name of the book I had mentioned by Cynthia Clarke. So it's a book by Karch, K-A-R-C-H, and it is called Rise of the Phoenix. Just to answer quickly in my 30 seconds, I think the government needs to take a look at what it can do legislatively. And I'm not asking for it to give any group special privileges, but for it to remove the special privileges that some enjoy, so that we can achieve an equal playing field. So I think if they develop a kind of suspicion towards monopolies, a suspicion towards oligarchies and so forth, and legislatively pass rules to make sure that you remove those, then people would have, although there are historical imbalances, but at least to start off, you would have an equal playing field going forward.
And the president of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Edward Clarke, your organization has identified the need for a more equitable Barbados. You would have differed in terms of opinion at some points with how we get there. You would have differed in your opinion from some of the other panelists. Just your final words, what's the role of the Barbados Private Sector Association in the move towards a more equitable business environment for Barbados?
Kareem, I think the first thing to do is doing something like this, having an open discussion, frank open discussion. I think that's critical. We as a people need to be mature enough to discuss. You might not agree, but you have to understand other people's opinion and see if they can convince you of what they're saying. Rather than take it as a personal attack on people when they don't agree or say something you don't agree with. I think we must say that the Barbados Private Sector Association is very willing to sit down and discuss with any social partnership or the wider community in Barbados to see how we can bring about change. And if there are things that are happening that should not be happening, I will support any request for change of those. I am not so much in favor of legislative. I don't think we should be making things or legislating on things like that. I think that we need to, as a people, be more mature than to have a government dictate how we should act as people. And we must live to learn to live, to work together as a community. And whether you're black, white, or mixed race, or any other, or the Indian race, and work together and bring Barbados forward. And that's our goal in private sector. I represent a wide cross section of people, and that's our goal. We want to work together. We want to sit down and talk and get through this together.
Okay. Tahir Bubulia, you are the youngest on the panel, and you've already distinguished yourself as a leader among your peers. Where should we be going, particularly if we want to create a better tomorrow for our young people?
First of all, let me thank you once again for having me on the program. I think discussions like these are important, but where do we go from here? We need to carry these discussions into the communities and onto the blocks where the average young person can hear this discussion and hear what is taking place at the top, at the level where they have to be involved. And we need to take all hands on that approach and work together in harmony, come together as one united people. We need to work together. It's not black, it's not white, it's not Muslim, it's not Christian. We all need to come together as one, unite as one people, and work together on the common goal for the betterment of Barbados and the betterment of us as ourselves and for the betterment of Barbados on a whole. And once again, I thank you. I wish everyone all the best. Continue staying safe in this COVID time, and let us continue these discussions moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, and that brings us to the end of our discussion on race relations in Barbados. Once again, I want to thank each and every one of our panelists, all the Barbadians and persons from abroad who would have tuned in on the various social media platforms as we continue this discussion in an effort to create a more equitable Barbados and a Barbados in which everyone can achieve their full potential. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
All in. This means something.